just give us a few more seconds for people to show up, and then we'll get started. My name is Michael Schaefer-Omerman. I'm the senior editor here at the Cannigma. If you stumbled here, if the algorithm allows such a thing, we are a cannabis education site using science-backed data to tell stories of cannabis and the science behind it. So let's get started. As I said, I'm Michael Schaefer-Omerman. I will introduce all the panelists now very quickly, and then a little bit more when we get to speak. So we have Alana Goldberg, who is the CEO of the Cannigma, Ben Hartman, who's our senior writer, and many other things. Matan Whale, who's our content strategy director. Dr. Cody Peterson, who is our scientific advisor and a clinical pharmacist with a specialty in cannabis. And Eden Nasco, who is our SEO magician. Make sure that people can find us in the world. So this is called Meet the Editorial Team. This is the Cannigma editorial team. In the world of journalism, there's a maxim that you should never let the story become about yourself, but we think we're pretty interesting. But seriously, what's interesting is what we're doing and how we're doing it, the values behind it, the depth that we get into the science, and how we try and get reliable information about cannabis to people who, for the most part, don't have many other places to get it. And we thought that the best way to tell you about those values and the way that we do things and the way that we approach our work was not to just get up here and give biographical little speeches about why we do what we do and why we're qualified to do it, but to tell you a few stories, mostly about things that changed the way that we do our jobs, the way that we think about cannabis, the cannabis space, medical cannabis, and yeah. So let's get started with that. I'm going to go to Ben first because he wins in the number of articles written competition.
It's also it's quality, it's not quantity. Yeah. But go ahead.
We're going to get to Cody right after you, so I'm going to ask you to stay away from the science.
Okay.
But I want to ask you first.
No problem.
What's an example of a story, or more if you can think of them, that changed your views of cannabis or your approach to writing and reporting about cannabis?
So I think there's a lot that could potentially select. And I think when we look at cannabis, it's a thing that a lot of us, and I'm sure a lot of people listening at home, think we know it really well. Maybe we've known it on a personal level since we were teenagers, or maybe not long after. But beyond kind of that personal level or as a hobby and all that, there's a lot more to that. So and that includes myself and a lot of things I've learned. And one of those pieces was a really long piece we put together a few months ago. I think it was about 3,000 words. And it was about climate change and cannabis from the perspective of what is the impact of cannabis cultivation on a grand scale, specifically indoor cannabis grows, because they use a great deal of electricity, and there's also the emissions they produce and things like that. So it was taking it away from, instead of looking at what people might think of when they think about cannabis cultivation a lot of times, which may be, outdoor grow in Humboldt County or somebody in their basement, and actually talking about, when you have these big industrial grows, in these greenhouses that are, really massive and putting out a whole lot of power, what is the cost of that? And it's something that I hadn't really thought about a lot as a writer here, as somebody covering cannabis, or as a consumer, because I think we're all on board with legalization and let's let it spread as far as we can and let's support that. But I think this is an example, I think, of an article that kind of makes us take a step back and be like, okay, that's great. We're all on board with legalization and all that. But as this industry spreads and grows and gets bigger, what are the costs that are there along the way? And as an extension of that, what can we as consumers do to maybe be more conscious about these costs, like we would with, when we purchase groceries or when we purchase, anything really. So it's a way of changing maybe the perception about how we look at that, and also what our role and what our agency is in encountering that. And it was a lot of really interesting people that we spoke to. So that's just one.
It kind of reminds me.
Keep cultivating cannabis. I'm not saying you shouldn't cultivate it. I don't want to give anybody the wrong idea. Please do. But as we do, just like anything in life, more the merrier, but let's try to find a way to do it a little bit better.
It's something you said there that we're, not afraid to, maybe you didn't say this, but it reminded me of something that we talk about a lot in all aspects of what we do, not just cultivation and news reporting, but, looking at the science as well, about not being afraid to talk about the things that, aren't super optimistic or necessarily good news about cannabis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think, if you look at cannabis almost like a family member who you love, you love them to death, but you also got to take into account there's some negative things there too, and you don't want to ignore them or act like they don't exist. Not to compare cannabis to your uncle or something, but I think if we're gonna really advocate for things or really talk about them in a really well educated and scientifically supported manner, we also got to talk about things that maybe are less positive or a little more complex, because if anything, for one, it's just your credibility. If you're just going to be constantly an advocate and never talk about anything negative, then that kind of hurts your credibility. But I think it also helps readers and helps consumers, helps anybody out there kind of understand things in a better, more holistic fashion, and also make better decisions.
I'll also just say that you and I, as editor and writer, discuss quite a bit the things that we learn through reporting on issues like this, on the environment, on social equity and historic injustices in the cannabis world, and how they affect our reporting going forward. That the more you learn, the more you can put into everything else and contextualize and identify problems and help build a better industry.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we saw that a lot this past summer or last summer, when there were all the protests in the states over criminal justice issues, racial justice issues, police brutality, and all that. We saw time and again that the drug war was very central in that, including cannabis. And a lot of people, a real focus for a lot of people in cannabis when that was going on is like, well, how do we address how we're connected to this? How do we address everybody wants to talk about legalization and this great cannabis industry, but are we also talking about the racial component? Are we as diverse as we can be? How do we rectify all those people, all the pain that was caused and all the damage and all the broken lives over these years? It's not one thing to just say, hey, it's legal, let's move on, turn the page, that's done. No, there's a lot of people who were harmed over the years. There's a lot of things that we can, if we are conscious, as not just as consumers, but as people in this industry, to do things in a better way. And I think, we've always had in mind the criminal justice aspects of cannabis, especially those of us who grew up when legalization was a very long ways off. But I think the protests and everything were a real occasion for people to take a step back and look and say, we need to address these things if we're going to move forward. And so that's something that, even if a lot of people were really familiar with the issue, it was really important to talk about it and to keep that in mind when we cover these issues, how things like the criminal justice system and diversity and all these things, how they relate to cannabis in this industry that we all we're all fans of, but we all want to make sure is a better place.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Ben.
Thank you.
I would just say that, I think to me, it's reflective of a lot of the ways that as cannabis becomes more mainstream, it, is subject to all of the same concerns and problems that everything else in society has. It's when it's illegal and it's, kept in the shadows, it's isolated from a lot of these issues. Right. But once you bring it into the mainstream, all of a sudden these are things that need to be addressed. The environment and
weed is not doesn't exist in a vacuum, and weed is not cannabis is not somehow independent of all these problems we have in our society and all these other issues. It affects it just like anything else, even more than a lot of other things, certainly.
So unless anybody on the panel has any questions for Ben, let's move forward to Cody.
Well, that's perfect, because I wanted to get what Ben was saying anyway. Hey guys, I'm Cody Peterson. I'm your cannabis pharmacist and scientific advisor here at the Cannigma. And so just to kind of touch on, I'll give my story and you'll hear plenty from me. But kind of touching on what Ben said, I think it's really important, and a focus we have at the Cannigma is going science forward, right? So whether the science is positive or negative, we're really trying to lean on existing research and write the story around that. there's a lot of narratives around cannabis, and we sort of make these stories around it historically, especially because it was prohibited, right? So then it got pushed into the sort of the good versus evil category, and you know, the science sort of got swept under the rug. And I think the big focus has to be, including as it relates to, you know, the impact of cannabis cultivation on climate change, and whether there is an impact on early teen cannabis use, and the incidence of mental illness later in life. All of these topics need to be hashed out, and coming at it from with a science forward perspective is really what I think sets the Cannigma apart from a lot of other, you know, there's not that many other cannabis media outlets, but from the other ones. And really what sort of drives me and what makes me excited about participating in this group. So definitely, and I love that we're looking in the mirror as an industry and as an organization and saying, how does this impact the world around us? So very cool.
I agree. So Cody, you're steeped, as you mentioned, you're steeped in the science of cannabis, and the science of medicine, and the science of cannabis medicine. I imagine at this point there's not a whole lot that blows your mind in that area, but I'll ask you anyway. Is there something that you've come across in your work that's changed the way that's changed the way you think about cannabis or medicine or cannabis medicine?
Not one thing, so many things. Honestly, like, I am blown away by the pharmacologic soup that is cannabis, but also by sort of the pharmacologic assumptions, things that I was taught in school that cannabis has forced me to challenge. So in preparation for this call, we were sort of reflecting on a story where we sort of changed our perspective, and I got to point to my buddy over here, Matan, in our early conversations. So I mentioned this with pharmacist perspective, right? We're taught in pharmacy school that essentially the ideal medication or therapeutic or drug is one that targets a specific receptor, has very sort of selective action and acting within the body. I would say, I don't know, 8 months ago, Matan reached out to me, brought me into the fold here, and soon after that, we started talking about, sure enough, the entourage effect. And I came in pretty skeptical about the existing data available on the effect of terpenes on. Can
you just explain what the entourage effect is really quickly in a sentence or two?
Of course. Yeah, that's it. I don't get a few paragraphs, just one sentence.
Okay, 4 sentences max.
Okay, I'll try. Simply put, is the effect of the whole plant cannabis when you consume it as all of its constituents, which there can be up to 500 different parts of cannabis, has more impact or has different impacts than just one. So the comparison would be consuming just THC alone versus consuming the whole plant, which contains THC, other cannabinoids, as well as the essential oils of the plant. Again, as a pharmacist, I'm trained, you know, ideally you want one drug, one target, and that's an ideal medication. So Matan doesn't really agree with me. He's like, he had some pretty good arguments and some pretty good references to share. And so he decides to tell me to write an article for a very common terpene, or an essential oil in cannabis. This is known as beta-caryophyllene. Now, originally, I wasn't overly enthused, but I wasn't against it. And so Matan hit me with the standard sort of, this is the brief, here's your article, and here's what you're going to write. What ended up happening, though, is I went down a rabbit hole of cannabis science and pharmacology, and I came out on the other side feeling a little bit like a changed man, at least from a pharmacist perspective, realizing the really complex nature by which these plant molecules, beta-caryophyllene in particular, engage with our bodies. And in this case, one of the things was that I said pharmacists like selective drugs, right? Well, in the case of beta-caryophyllene, it is somewhat selective, and it actually engages specifically with a certain part of your endocannabinoid system known as the CB2 receptor. I was unaware of this completely, and I found it really intriguing. And soon after that, I continued reading and realized that half of all plants that we consume and eat on planet Earth are actually rich in this terpene. So many of the spices that you keep in your spice cabinet are very abundant in this cannabis molecule, or what I had associated with cannabis. So this beta-caryophyllene can be found in cinnamon, in basil, in mint, nutmeg, and many more spices. And things have always been valued by our cultures, but we've never really been able to look scientifically and say, it's this molecule that has this engagement with the endocannabinoid system, and that's why it's helpful, and that's why it's beneficial. And that's why we should eat a well-rounded diet that's rich in vegetables, herbs, and spices. So it tied together so many aspects of not cannabis so much, like what is plant medicine and what is the validity to that. And interestingly, what I found is that it often ties in the endocannabinoid system. So cannabis is not an exception. It plays very much within the confines of a lot of plants and the systems at which plants engage our bodies. So I was pretty blown away, considering as a pharmacist, I really wasn't even introduced to the endocannabinoid system, and it turns out that this system interconnects all of our bodies. It's in our eyes, our brains, in our lungs, our liver, and many other places around the body.
I'm going to get nerdy for a second here.
I love it.
Is a cocktail of single target drugs within one pill any different than cannabis is, with a lot of different active ingredients? Or is the idea that they work differently when they're combined, as opposed to just a bunch of things doing a bunch of different things at the same time? Did that make any sense?
Ooh, I don't know that I got the full question. When you say a cocktail, do you mean a blend of things, or an actual like vodka liquor cocktail? Like, do you see how I'm? Can you elaborate on that word?
More in the sense of a cocktail of drugs, like multiple drugs taken at the same time or administered together. Meaning, if you give me 3 different drugs as a pharmacist, 3 different pills, and I take them at the same time, they're presumably doing 3 different things at the same time, right? And maybe that's the desired effect.
Yeah, you could hypothetically introduce more than one molecule at the same time, and then they could interact with one another, which by definition, depending on what the intended outcome is, could be on rush. It just turns out that cannabis and nature packed all this stuff together for us already, and it's already sitting there in the right mixture and the right sort of co-conspirators, all as Mother Nature intended. And that's sort of the coolness that I found in it.
All right, I'll take it.
Coolness. Yeah, of course. Well, when leaving you with that great word choice, certainly go to the next person. How could they top coolness?
Well, she is the definition of coolness, especially her job and her magical abilities that she brings to everything that we do. Ida Nasco. Ida is our head of SEO. Now, SEO, for those of you who don't live in this world, is search engine optimization, which in short means she ensures that people read the things that we write. She makes sure that when you look for information about cannabis in Google, in Bing, if that's your thing, that you find us. And again, if you're not in this world, it's, the shadows, and it's a very magical place that is difficult in most other industries. So
very interesting.
In cannabis, it's very unique, your job. And so I wanted to hear from you, what was the moment when you understood that doing SEO in the cannabis world is different from every other type of SEO work?
So I think that moment was really like almost right away when I got to the Cannigma. Like one of the first things that I do when I start working in a new niche or new field is that I look for content ideas. It can be things that we haven't already written about, or maybe additional content to existing articles. And the way I map that is by doing what we call keyword research, which is just to get an overview of queries that are relevant to our industry, like the cannabis industry. And I want to know how popular certain keywords are. And usually you will use a tool called AdWords. For those of you who don't know AdWords, it's a tool from Google that gives you data for certain keywords or search terms. For example, I want to know what's the most popular CBD product. I'll see that CBD oil has around 100,000 searches, while CBD gummies have around 5,000 searches. So in this case, I know that CBD oil is the most searched for CBD product. But this is just a made-up example because Google doesn't actually display the search volume for anything cannabis related. And why is that? That is because Google has decided that like certain keywords, they don't allow the search volume to be displayed, and they don't allow us to run ads on them, etc., etc. And this says something. Yeah.
Can I just make sure I got this correct? For pretty much everything else on the internet, you as an SEO person can see what people are searching for in Google and how they're searching for it and what words they're typing into Google to see for it. But for cannabis, you can't see any of that.
Yeah, so like for pretty much any keyword, anything from, Beyonce to casino, I can see how many people are topics. But for cannabis and like medicine, you can't. And that's really, really interesting. It really tells you like how Google views our industry. It's a gray area. That's a big hurdle for us when we want to choose and define like what the most popular topics are and what to put on the website.
So how has that gigantic handicap affected the way that you approach your job?
Well, I'm really lucky because I work with a team of experts. That would be you guys, who knows everything there is to know about cannabis. And there are like ways to overcome this, like know the industry, follow influencers, look at the main websites, what are they writing about, what do we know, what knowledge do we have in the Cannigma that still hasn't been written about. Everybody's doing their own research, everybody's really involved. Then you have other tools such as Google Trends where you can see like trending topics, for example, cannabis, and you see maybe certain strains are trending or products, or there's a cannabinoid that's trending. And we always keep updating our content. This is an industry that keeps evolving. New research is coming up all the time. We are much wiser today than just, for example, a year ago. So we are always updating our main content. And then there are some other tools that can give us a general idea.
I'll just jump in and say that being forced to update the content is absolutely a positive for every area, because it forces us to make sure that we're constantly at the forefront of the science, of the research, that we're presenting the most recent information. And who knows if that's a double-sided coin, chicken or the egg. But hopefully it's by updating the content and making sure that we're the most updated and have the most up-to-date information. I think that helps us be the most relevant resource out there for these issues.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in and say that I think that we at the Cannigma, we really know what we're doing, not to toot our own horn here or anything, but we believe in the product and we take this really seriously. And when you have a quality team and when you have a group of experts, then it's really easy to get those great pieces out.
Absolutely. And as our graphic designer likes to say, content is queen. You know, you build it right and people. Thank you, Ida. That was really insightful. Matan, how are you doing?
I'm going to unmute myself. What's up?
You're the kind of the brain trust of this whole operation. So I have.
I'm one hemisphere. Cody is the other one.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it's just the two of you.
Cody, what's the thing that's called that separates the two hemispheres of the brain?
Corpus callosum.
Who's that?
Is that me?
You see?
Okay. Anyway.
I'm the skull kids.
Everybody else, mute yourself again, please. Matan, we operate in an arena that we've touched on this already with Ben and Cody. We operate in an arena that's been greatly influenced by decades of prohibition and the ensuing lack of research because it was illegal, and it still is. Up until what was it, last week? You could only get cannabis from one place in the United States if you wanted to do any research on it at the university. Yeah. And one of the results of that is that misnomers and misused terms have, completely not just penetrated the mainstream lexicon of cannabis, but they are it. There basically is nothing else as far as most people are concerned. And one of those areas that's most apparent and among the most difficult to address is strain names. Now, Matan, you've been working on how to address this problem for the Cannigma. Can you tell us a little bit about how you approach that and why and how that's affected your work moving forward?
Yeah, right. Yeah, so strain names is a big issue, and we recognized that fairly quickly, early on. Now, the reason it's a big issue is because for us, the Cannigma, is because a huge part of our audience is looking for strain names because they're trying to understand how they can predict their experience from the product they get, and the product they get are based on strain names often. Now,
predict
on
the
the other
experience,
hand,
meaning I want something that's uplifting or sedative. I want to go to sleep or I want to draw.
I mean, these are the potential effects, but we don't really know how to correlate these yet. So if you buy a bottle of Coke, for instance, of Coca-Cola, you know what to expect. If you buy, you're not getting Sprite or Fanta, for instance. You know what the experience is going to be. And we have the tendency to assume that strains are the same. So there is a strain name and it's going to cause specific effects, and there is another strain next to it and it will cause different effects. But it's not we're not there yet, scientifically speaking. We don't know how to predict effect that efficiently, especially not based on strain names. So what I was about to say is we know that people are looking for that on the one hand, but on the other hand, we know that strain names don't mean anything, basically. Yeah, you can't really predict anything based on a strain name. And we had a huge deliberation, trying to understand how to tackle that. How can we on the one hand meet our audience and answer the questions, the most relevant questions online, but on the other hand, stay true to science, and to what we know is true, what's reality. And we ended up finding a very original solution for that. And before I go to that, I just wanted to circle back on the issue of strain names and why they don't mean much. So there are several reasons, but the main one, as far as I'm concerned, is the lack of standards. So basically, anyone can grow anything and call it however they want. I can grow a cannabis plant in my backyard. If I had a backyard, I could have gone in my backyard and call it Baba Kush, and no one can really say otherwise. How can you prove me wrong? No one ever defined what's Baba Kush. That's that, and that's the main reason why strain names don't mean much. Now, putting that aside, what actually does matter is the chemical structure, the chemical composition of the cannabis plant or the bud or the oil that you have in front of you. And that's what a cocktail of everything I just said is what we try to do as a solution in our strain page. So, for instance, if we take Baba Kush, for instance, as an example, you'll find, like if you Google Baba Kush plus the Cannigma, you'll find a lot of the information you can find on other platforms about general information about like the lineage of the strain and who bred it and why and when and where and stuff like that. But what we added was the chemical composition. Now it's fairly complicated, like how to do that, because we needed to create access to like a very large database of certificate of analysis. These are, is this like common, I don't know if I need to explain like what's a certificate of analysis?
Certificate analysis is the lab report about a strain.
Yeah,
in places like California and other places,
yeah.
You're required to have the cannabis tested before it can be sold. They test for the ingredients and possible toxins and things like that.
Exactly. So we have a big database, and we go and separate all of the products that were tested that were named Baba Kush, and then we look at the average. We look at the average of THC, CBD, CBG, specific terpenes, and then we put that on the page. After we've done that, and we have the chemical composition, we look at the scientific literature, the existing one, like that, what we can tell about that chemical profile. And based on that, we try to assess what would be the likely effect that you'll experience from that chemical profile. Now, this was the solution we found when talking about strains. Again, trying to keep the science in, you know, like keep it scientifically based and evidence-based. There are two main limitations when it comes to like the approach we chose. One is consistency, and the other is research. So when it comes to consistency, again, taking the Baba Kush example, if someone is walking into a dispensary and get a Baba Kush, the likelihood of that Baba Kush having the same chemical composition as what we have on our strain page is slim to none. Yeah, so that's one main issue. And the other one is the research. So for the most part, the research we're basing our assessments on is preclinical, is very much preliminary. So we can't say for sure this chemical structure or chemical profile is going to create these effects, but we can say it's likely to, or it may cause this. Like it's more likely than other chemical profiles. So these are the two main limits.
Preclinical, we mean it hasn't been tested on humans, right?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Cody is going to say something.
One of the biggest challenges, and you know I was going to talk to you about this, John, right?
Sure.
This is one of the biggest challenges of where the consumer is versus where the science is.
Exactly.
So we had some really influential papers come out over the last 20 years that really drove forward this message that the terpenes or the essential oils in cannabis have a major influence on their effects. And there's a reason to think that's true. But we are not at a point yet where we can predictably say this is up, this is down, as well as we're still learning about the complexities of everyone's endocannabis. So, Matan came up with a really innovative solution to a very complex problem. It seems easy, right? You just sort of ascribe some feelings to a name of a cannabis plant and go with it. But as he said, that's like the surface view. When you start to dig into it, you start to uncover, oh, maybe we don't have enough information to support that, or perhaps we're overlooking something. So this was a big undertaking, Matan, and I like the strain pages.
Cheers. Yeah, it was a very big project and demanding one, which is still ongoing. Now, just circling back on these two limitations, it's not a big issue for us, because circling back at why we even started this project, like what was the main objective that we were trying to address, it was to provide our audience the best tools science has now when choosing cannabis products. That was the objective. And the way we do that is starting by like meeting the audience where they are. They're looking for Baba Kush, we have to be there. And then explain that even though something is called Baba Kush, it doesn't mean much. And then you have the chemical composition, but you shouldn't count on what we're saying. You should count on what's the COA, the certificate of analysis in the dispensary where you're getting your Baba Kush is saying, and basically shy away from strain names and go towards what we call chemobars, chemical varieties. Yeah, so the chemical profiles, and we are doing that very well, I guess. I think in the strain pages. And these two limitations are not impeding or moving forward, like when trying to achieve that. So I just had to like specify.
So two quick things. One is about half an hour ago, we published an article by Matan about chemobars and oh my God, I forgot the other word.
Chemobars and chemotypes.
Chemobars and chemotypes. So I hope one of my colleagues behind Backstage here can paste the link to that article into the comments here. So anybody can open that tab and then come back over here real quick. You know, I think the strain pages, and I know I said this about somebody else's story a few minutes ago, but I think the strain pages and what you just described really does reflect the challenge and the approach that we have decided to approach that challenge with at the Cannigma when it comes to cannabis science, which is acknowledge the limitations, lay out what evidence we do have, and try and piece together, you know, give that in a form that people can use the existing scientific information to make the best decisions that they can.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you, Matan. Unless anybody else has any questions.
Oh, I thought there was a question.
Oh, no.
No, I said two things and then I go, okay, yes. Cheers. So I'm going to mute myself. Cool.
So, Alana, I saved your story for last because it's one of my favorites. I won't say any more than that. I'm going to still ask you the question, though.
Even though you know the answer.
Even though I know the answer. Like a good pretend lawyer. What is something that you've come across in your work that changed your perspective about cannabis, that changed your perception about the people in cannabis, or, you know, anything around there?
Yeah, so I think like Cody said, I can think of many different stories. But what I want to talk about today is mothers. Within our first few months of getting this whole Cannigma thing up and going, I had really the honor and the privilege to interview a few mothers who were cannabis advocates. And when they told me their stories for the Cannabis Enigma podcast, which maybe someone can put some links in the comments here for us as well, I basically started to get this insight into this backwards nature of how things work in the cannabis space. So I'll tell a couple of the stories and then we'll get back to what we learned from it at the end. So first of all, Hannah Deacon, who I interviewed in Lisbon at a conference. Remember conferences? Those were fun. So Hannah Deacon, her son has a form of treatment-resistant epilepsy, and she actually ended up moving with her family over to the Netherlands in order to get from the UK, in order to get legal cannabis treatment for her son, and has since gone on to be really central in cannabis regulation reform in the UK. And around a similar time, I also interviewed Catherine Jacobson, who's now a VP at Tilray, one of the main Canadian cannabis companies, who also has a son who also has a different type of treatment-resistant epilepsy, and she heard these stories and decided to try cannabis as well. And as it turns out, she has a scientific background and was able to actually make the preparations for her son. So she was running around, this is pre-legalization in California actually, at the time, and she was running around buying massive bags of hemp basically from dealers and then working in her garage to try and make a cannabis oil that could work for her young son. And she tells this story, again, listen to the podcast episode. If you can listen to one, listen to this one. She tells the story of how sometimes she would work for a whole week on these preparations and then have to dump them because it wasn't right. But she saw that it worked. And it was the only thing that was working to improve quality of life for her son. And so she pushed for it. And these preparations that she was making in the garage actually ended up being Epidiolex, because she got in touch with a pharmaceutical company called GW Pharma and worked with them in order to create this medication. So why am I telling all these stories? Because it's very weird, really, a situation where parents are making formulations in their garages and then going to pharmaceutical companies and saying, come on, I can't do this on myself, help me make the medication for me. When you think about like the Western medicine model that we're used to, which is you go to your doctor, the doctor tells you what to take, then you go to someone like Cody, they give you your medication, they tell you take it in the morning, take it in the night, that's it, we know everything, and you're done. And this is completely flipped. And I think we see the same thing also. So this is from a product development, like a cannabis product development.
I'll just jump in and say that Epidiolex is the only FDA approved cannabis based medication. Like this one mother
CBD.
in her garage. No, but the only one that comes from cannabis itself. The other ones are synthetic. This mother in her garage, like literally started the process that got the first cannabis-derived, cannabis-based medication approved by the FDA.
Right. So really groundbreaking. And the other thing that I just wanted to say is that I think we see the same thing when it comes to regulation, that it's so bottom up rather than top down. And I think this is something which is baffling and really mind-blowing about this space, and also brilliant. The fact that, patients and consumers have the power to influence the market and to really, spearhead this change that we're seeing rolling out around us at the moment. These interviews with these mothers specifically and activists across the board have shined a light on that for us and seem to come up all the time for me. And I think specifically personally as a mother hearing these stories, just thinking like, I wish I would have the strength. I hope that I would have the strength to act like this if I was in this situation, to break laws, to like push myself in every single way to help my child, to improve their quality of life, maybe save their life even.
I just want to jump in quickly and also say that it's also about the science. Like the scientific world is also learning a lot from these families and parents. And there are a bunch of examples, but like the one that came in mind is ASD. Actually, is autism. Yeah. So to begin with, as far as I know, like there was no science at all to even suggest there is reason to look at cannabis as a solution for autism. But a lot of the kids that suffered from epilepsy and were treated with cannabis also had ASD. And that's how it started, at least here in Israel. That's how it started. And then you saw like 5, 10, 15 different studies that talk about ASD and cannabis. And it all started because of the families and how they noticed that it's not just the epilepsy, it's also the ASD that is becoming like better, I guess. It's not just regulation, it's also from a scientific perspective. And Cody is also going to add something, it seems to be.
No, I have to, because you're totally right. And this is what makes cannabis so unique, right? Prohibition has put us here, right? And this is where the Cannigma comes in and tries to have this voice, because this is happening all over. The UCSD, we finally have an autism study approved here in the United States looking at CBD, a high-quality, placebo-controlled, at a well-established university. But it took how many years, right? I mean, we were using hemp as medicine before 1940, and now here we are finally, again, just starting to actually study it. So this is happening across all of cannabis, and this is where I think that the Cannigma steps in. We're trying to be that voice of the people, right, talking in strain names, and then connecting that to science. And this gets me fired up. I love it, and this is where the industry's at, and I'm excited to see where it's going.
Yeah, I think another example as well, just like kind of piggybacking on what Nathan and Cody were saying, is physicians who realize that what they thought was a comorbidity of addiction or drug use and certain conditions like Tourette's, for example, is actually patients self-treating. And there's been so much research that's kind of sprung from that. From physicians realizing, oh, hang on, maybe I need to be listening to my patients rather than just my patients listening to me. Again, looking at that like flip from the traditional model, which connects also with I think something without like spinning off to a complete different topic, which is empowering patients to take control of their own wellness rather than just, going to the authority and asking them what to do and following instructions.
Absolutely. And, there's also a safety issue considering that, where I think and the type of work that we're doing, there are others doing it, of course, we're not the only ones in this space, but, specifically because people are experimenting that are on their own and trying to find treatments that work in the absence of guidance from the medical establishment, either because they don't have access to it or because it's not educated or they don't trust it or, or because it's not working for them. it's important to know about things like drug interactions and safety issues and how to, mitigate side effects and dosing and things that, even if we don't have the full picture from science yet, we know enough to give people basic guidelines that can maintain safety in their endeavor for wellness and health.
People are Googling all of these questions anyway, and what we're trying to do at the Cannigma and Matan and I, we're trying to drive forward the information that is as science-based as possible, because it's hard to figure out where there are reliable sources when you go to Dr. Google. Even though you can't tell people are Googling these things already because IDA can't pull that data. They are very much looking for the answers that we're trying to solve. And if anyone's listening, I encourage you, if you have a question specifically about cannabis or specifically about something you want to hear or read about, send us an email. Just reach out and we will happily look at it from a scientific perspective, turn it into an article. We got Ben over here who's a magician, and I'll review it and make sure you got the science right, and we'll put it out for anyone else, not just you. Anyone who's looking for that on Google, they can find it then. And again, that's what gets me excited about doing this with you fine folks.
Absolutely. And, one of the most fun things about this job is trying to figure out what questions people need answered, and then figuring out those answers with all of you fun folks. So we have a few questions. Alana, were you done?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure I'll find something else to say, but go on.
We have a few questions. The first one is a fun, not fun, funnier in retrospect story. Which asks if we've ever been blocked. And I believe the one that I'm aware of is we got blocked on Twitter at some point. Our account just got shut down. This is something that a lot of cannabis companies and publications have dealt with on various platforms, specifically social platforms. And like anybody who's ever been blocked on one of those platforms, we tried to do exactly what we were told to do, submit the form explaining why it was a mistake and do this and do that. And of course, nothing happened. And we tried calling the phone numbers and, of course, the answering machine lady person at Twitter, as soon as you call, says, we don't have anybody here who can talk to you. That's like the first thing they say. Anyway, we eventually got back online. We have no idea why we were blocked or why we were unblocked. Maybe we just contacted enough people who knew enough people who knew enough people who worked at Twitter. But yeah, I know that we also, we can't advertise, we can't promote our content in a paid way, which most publications do to try and reach new readers on any of the social platforms or on Google or basically anywhere else. So we're blocked not just in the active sense, but also in the esoteric sense.
Like I say, another way that we've been blocked, or I've been personally blocked or deleted on Reddit. I started using Reddit on a fairly frequent occasion to share articles. And if you're sharing them on weed threads, then you're good. If it's a cannabis related thread, then you should be fine. But there were a number of times where it was something that was related to a different subject, so I tried to share it on that particular Reddit stream and got blocked. Like, for instance, on a parenting thread, I tried to share an article that we wrote about cannabis and parenting, and it was deleted and I was blocked from commenting on that particular parenting stream, although there are quite a few on Reddit, and just other ones that, so you find, obviously it depends on where you are, but I think this applies not just in Reddit, as mainstream as cannabis is becoming in a lot of ways, still in a lot of in a lot of avenues, people don't really want to talk about it, don't want to be associated, or think that it can detract for something. Like I would assume, a big time parenting stream like that may want to be like, this is what we're about, or we don't want to be seen as encouraging parents to be using cannabis or something like that. So they just, even if they're not, let's say, fanatically opposed to it, they don't want to, they don't want to get involved. And I think that relates to a thing when we wrote about parenting and cannabis. I found we put out a call on Reddit and Twitter and Facebook for people to send their own impressions if you're a parent who uses cannabis to help you relax, and how does it interact with your parenting. And it was just an avalanche of direct messages and tweets and all that. And I talked to a lot of those folks, but then when you asked them to go on the record, almost none of them would. So it's the type of thing to where what's clear about that, to me, what that taught me about cannabis, which isn't, necessarily an earth-shattering thing, is that it's something that people from all walks of life, like all of you all listening right now, are interested in, not just stereotypical cannabis fans from days of yore, but it's all types of people.
You're welcome also.
Yeah, everybody. We take all types. But so all types of people want to talk about it, but don't want anybody to know they're talking about it. They want to let you know what they think, but they don't want anybody to know that they let you know what they think. So there's still a lot of ground to cover there, but I think it reflects just the way that so many people find this interesting in so many ways. And not only are they not maybe the traditional types of cannabis fans that we would think of, they also are more interested on a deeper level. Like, it's not the sort of approach so much like, oh, it's just herb. What's the big fuss? No, people actually want to know more, and they want to learn more, and they want to talk more, but they might not want you to know they're talking. And so sometimes you might get blocked or deleted, but keep posting. I always say, post through everything. Keep tweeting. What's the worst that can happen?
That's stigma, right?
Yeah, still stigma.
It's about breaking the stigmas, and even within, the cannabis supportive community, we're still living like, most of us are here in Israel, where it's still illegal for recreational use. So we got a way to go there, I guess, even in legal jurisdictions.
And that stigma also can break down. I was going to say the stigma can also, a thing that we've covered also is the stigma can also depend on who you are. In minority communities, the stigma can be a lot stronger. People who are more likely to have had bad experiences with the police, or to be in communities that are more often targeted by police, they're not going to feel like, hey, let's just talk about, marijuana on the internet. These people are more cautious, and for good reason. So the stigma is still there, especially depending on who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I really understood that lesson on a personal sense when I was speaking to a colleague here in Israel, a former colleague of Middle Eastern descent, who was considering getting a medical card, like, just for occasional cannabis use. And I said, like, what would be the point? Like, why would you do that? And he said to me, like, you're a white woman, you probably don't have a problem walking down the street smoking a joint anywhere. You're probably not scared of this because you would be a whole lot less likely to get stopped. And it's true. I do feel more comfortable than I think many people would walking down the street. Anyway, I want to get back to this, the question about being blocked. And I think basically you've got to make a bit of a separation here between organic posting, specifically on social channels, but on Google as well, and paid. Because paid is a lot more problematic. When organic, like Ben said, there's occasions here and there where you can get blocked, or where you kind of hit on the stigma. I know I've also heard, like, a lot of readers have told us that they don't love things like this, the Facebook Live, because they don't necessarily feel comfortable even logging in to a Facebook Live that has the word cannabis in it, because they feel like they might be exposed to their network. But when it comes to paid advertising, there are very few options, and really no high quality options, unless you want to try work the system, unless you want to be like really creative and try and promote cannabis content without really saying the word cannabis. You want to say like green every time you were going to say cannabis or marijuana or weed. And it's really, I assume this is a reality that's only going to change once we see legalization across the board in the US. And this is true no matter where. Like, even if I wanted to pay for ads in Uruguay or in Canada, I still wouldn't be able to do that for cannabis-related terms. This is somewhere where we had a webinar just recently on what makes running a cannabis business different than running any other business. And I think this is something that's really central, that we're blocked from this for most industries. This is a very standard way to advertise, is using digital marketing tools, and that's just not an option for cannabis businesses.
Absolutely. I was going to say exactly what you just said. That everything that myself and Ben and Alana just said is changing. Maybe not the online stuff, but it's only going to get better as legalization spreads, as if federal legalization or decriminalization or descheduling even occurs on a federal level in the United States. We'll see that the stigma and the legal status are tied up together, they pull each other in the same direction. So hopefully we'll see some improvement, and your dispensary can send out text blasts again, Jessica. So I think that's about, excuse me. I think that's about all for us tonight. Thank you everybody for coming. And Alana, do you just want to say a few more words about the Cannigma and where people can find out more information if they are interested in working with us or partnering with us in any way?
Yeah, definitely. So www.cannigma.com. You can Google us as well. Ida will be tracking that. Ida can track searches for the word Cannigma. We were just talking about that today. Cannabis-related terms are more tricky. Google hasn't caught on that it's Cannigma in there. Anyway, so check us out on the website. There's also, pretty much every social channel you'll be able to find us, whatever you prefer. And our podcast, The Cannabis Enigma, also worth checking out. We're going to pop a whole lot of links of what we talked about in the comments here, so you can come back and check it out. And in terms of, what was the other thing you asked about? Recruiting. We're looking for speaking about social, we're looking to expand the team and take on a social media strategist. So if anyone knows anyone or is interested, please shoot over a CV. I'm easy to find. LinkedIn's always a good place to find me. And apart from that, thanks all for watching and for your support. And we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Thank
Bye.
you.